Welcome everybody to another live episode. I actually wanted to share with all of you a book that I read over Shabbat, which is called 10 Minutes a Day to a Better Marriage. I was reading this chapter in the book and I decided that it would be a very, very important segment to share with anyone who is interested in listening about how to be an effective speaker. I'm just going to put my phone on vibrate so that it doesn't interrupt us. Of course, it's difficult as always for me to decide whether I should talk in English or in Russian because this book is written in English. And of course, it would be very beneficial and helpful for those of you that don't understand English for me to translate it, but that becomes a little difficult. So if the majority of you say that it's better to do this segment in English, we're going to continue in English. But if a lot of you feel like I should also speak in Russian, I will try my best to also incorporate some Russian into this as well. So let's take a vote. And if the majority is okay with the English, I will continue doing this in English. So is English okay for everyone if we continue doing this in English? Let me hear your comments. Let me know if that's okay. And I will then decide which language to do this live on. Welcome to all of you who is joining. I know that it is a little bit late in New York, especially with the time change. It's actually 1 hour later. So Monday is going to be a little bit difficult, but we've done this before and we're going to do this again. We're going to be able to wake up tomorrow bright and early, head out to another week ahead, have an amazing week, and eventually get used to this time zone difference. I think the only benefit, the real benefit of having this time zone change is that Shabbat is starting late. We're not rushing anymore. We have an extra hour to get prepared. I also like the fact that Shabbat ends later, so we have more time to rest and relax. So there are many benefits to this time change. If you can hear me, just let me know that you're able to hear me, because on my end, it's showing that there is a poor connection. So if you're able to hear me very well, let me know that you're able to hear me. Can you hear me well? Is there any interruption on your end? Let me know. I don't see any comments. Not sure if it's a Facebook restriction. Lately, Facebook's been acting up. Can you hear me well? Is there any? Thank you, Milana. Okay, so I'm going to disregard. Thank you, Irina. Perfect. Thank you, Amina. Very, very good. So I know you're with me. It's very hard to talk when I'm talking to myself. So thank you, Yaakov. Excellent. So everyone is able to hear me. So we can begin. Hey, Ksenia, welcome. Nice to have you join me. All right. Once again, for all of you who are joining us right now, I am going to be reading from this book. I highly recommend it. It's called 10 Minutes a Day to a Better Marriage. Getting your spouse to understand you. I think that's a very, very good thing. If we can get our spouse to understand us, that's amazing. And the chapter that we're going to be discussing is going to be from chapter 5, called How to Be an Effective Speaker. Okay? And I'm going to read, and then we're going to discuss and explain a little bit of what this book is telling us. So the book starts off, the introduction to this chapter, and it says, whether one is addressing a large public audience or speaking privately in his house to his or her spouse, the goal is to be fully understood. It is not enough to simply have your words heard by your listeners. If you're speaking at home, for example, you want to feel that whatever you have to say is fully absorbed by your spouse. So if we come home and we're having a conversation with our husband and our wife, and we're busy talking to them, but they're not focusing on what we have to say, whether they're on their telephones or they're themselves, thinking about their work, or they're busy with the children, and here we are. We think they are listening to us, but in reality, they are completely spaced out. what's going to happen as a result? We're going to feel frustrated. We're going to feel like we're wasting time. And by accident, it's going to actually lead to problems. So this particular chapter, we're not going to be able to finish it tonight because there are 10 different steps in making sure that you are an effective speaker. I think we're going to have time maybe to cover 2 or 3 of those steps. And if you are interested in hearing more, you can either go ahead and buy this book or comment in the comment section that you want me to continue learning this chapter together with you, and I will have a part 2 or part 3 going forward. So tonight we're going to be learning rule number 1 and how to become an effective speaker. Rule number 1, be sure that your spouse is listening. Okay, how are you going to be sure that your spouse is listening? Before you can assume the role of a speaker, you have to make sure that you have a listener who's willing to hear what you have to say. If you need to speak to your husband or wife about something important or something sensitive, be sure that your husband or wife is not angry. They're not distracted, and make sure that you are fully prepared. Generally, it is advisable to check by asking your husband or wife, can you listen to me now? Or another way, I have something important to tell you. Are you able to be the listener now? So if there's something very important that you want to discuss, don't assume that now is a good time. Come to your husband or wife and ask them, is now a good time to have this conversation? Now, let's say you come and your husband says, no, it's not a good time. At least you know that he's not willing to listen to you. You take yourself away from the situation and you come back when your husband or your wife is ready to listen to you. So if your husband says, I'm not ready to listen to you right now, that does not mean that you're going to argue and say, well, you're never ready to listen. You asked, they answered. Walk away from the situation. We're going to have a situation, a scenario, a real life example of somebody who didn't follow this rule. And look at the end result of what happened. Miriam felt that her husband Benny had unfairly blamed her the previous day. He had flown off the handle, raised his voice, and accused her of being provocative. When Benny's anger subsided, Miriam thought about what happened and decided she has to talk to Benny about unfinished business. So we have a situation between Miriam and Benny. Miriam and Benny had an argument the night before. Her husband yelled at her, and Miriam felt that he yelled at her for no reason. He went his way. The next day, Miriam is not able to focus on anything. She says, you know what? I have to speak it to my husband about what he did to me yesterday. What he did was not acceptable, and I want to make sure it never happens again. Benny comes home from work, and Miriam decides now is a good time to talk to Benny. Remember rule number 1 before we continue. The rule number 1 is make sure your spouse is listening. So where is Benny when Miriam comes to him? Benny is sitting by his computer, where he usually sits whenever he has some free time. He's looking by the computer, and Miriam thinks, what is Benny doing? He's playing a game. So she says, now is a perfect time to let Benny know that he made her very upset yesterday with the way he attacked her. Miriam comes up to Benny, stands next to him, and realizes Benny is still looking at the computer. She does not wait for Benny to turn around, and she starts. Last night, says Miriam, you really ticked me off. When you lose control the way you did yesterday, Not only do you make me upset, you also really frighten our children. But before Miriam was able to go any further, Benny turns around and starts screaming at her. Can't you see what I'm doing? I'm busy balancing our checkbook. If you don't want me to do it, go ahead and do it yourself. Will you please leave me alone so I can finally get this done and go to bed? Miriam leaves the room without another word. She feels insulted, hurt, and even more hopeless than before. What did Miriam do wrong? Right? It's a good question. She sees Benny by the computer. She thinks he's playing a game because usually Benny goes to the computer only when he has free time and he plays games. She thinks it's a good moment and she shares with Benny that it bothered her yesterday when he lashed out. But instead, what happens? They get into a bigger fight. Apparently, Benny wasn't playing the computer, he was doing the checkbook, and now it's even worse than it was before. So what did Miriam do wrong? Let's figure this out. First of all, Miriam should have never began speaking until Benny was facing her. When Benny is looking at the computer screen, this is a clear indication that Benny is not paying attention to her. Okay, so mistake number one, she didn't acknowledge Benny face to face. She assumed he's listening to her, but he wasn't. He was busy doing what he's doing. So we want to make sure when we want to be heard, our husband or wife needs to be facing us, needs to be paying attention to us. Second mistake, Miriam did not inquire. She did not ask Benny if it's a good time for him to listen to her. If she had asked and said, is now a good time to talk, Benny would have told Miriam not to bother him. Had this been the case, Miriam then could have asked Benny, when is a good time? And then to start to talk when it's a more suitable time. So the second mistake, we think that it's a good time because for us it's a good time. Just because it's a good time for us does not mean it's a good time for our husband or our wife. Because maybe they came home and they had a bad day at work. Maybe they're hungry. Maybe they're exhausted. Maybe they just have a headache and they don't want to hear anybody. So don't assume that just because you want to talk right now, you're going to be heard. Ask your listener, is it a good time to talk? Now, if Benny suggested an alternative time, Miriam could have waited until then and then expect her spouse to be more attentive. But if Benny responded, I don't know, okay, when is a good time? I don't know. Miriam could have just approached him later again. In either case, Miriam could have avoided the disgrace and insult that she suffered simply by violating this rule. So rule number one, be sure your spouse is listening to you. Rule number two, we're going to skip. We're going to go to rule number three. Do not attack. Attacks are indictments that are leveled like criminal charges in a law of court. They are pronounced in a self-righteous tone, which almost always elicits defensive and counterattacks. As a rule, attacks begin with the words, you are, or you're always. The best way to avoid attacking your spouse is to try to say words like I instead of you. Milana, Ganesha Khordak Bechora. You're cute. So number two, do not attack. Because when you come to your husband or your wife and Jonah Shachordak, I was like, what does Ganesha mean? Now I got it. Jonah Shachordak. Yes, Milana, that's right. Number two, do not attack. Which means if you're coming to your husband or your wife and you say the words, You. It looks like you're accusing, you're attacking. And anytime somebody comes to you with the words you're always late. You're always getting me in trouble. You're always paying the bills late. When somebody constantly says you, it makes you feel, what did I do wrong? So your automatic reaction is to defend yourself. So don't say you. Change your statement to say the word I. So let's see how we can do it with this rule. Number, do not attack. Nurit felt that her husband Zev was stingy regarding giving money to their monetary gifts to their married children. So Nurit thinks that her husband is stingy when it comes to buying gifts for their married children. She felt that he was self-centered and selfish since he wanted to keep all the money to himself. Unlike Nurit, who enjoyed helping her adult children financially, Zev often complained that Nurit is squandering his hard-earned money on their ungrateful children. So we have a situation here between a husband and wife who have married children. The wife feels that she wants to keep giving her married children money. Why not? Help them. The husband, on the other hand, feels, why should I keep giving them money? They're not grateful. I work hard for this money. So now the husband and wife are not getting along in this particular subject. For many years, Nurit used to lambast Zev with unflattering terms, calling him selfish, self-centered, and unloving, whenever an opportunity rose for them to give gifts to their children. Eventually, Nurit learned how to express her feelings in a less confrontational manner. So every time they would get into this topic, Nurit, by accident, used to label her husband, you're so selfish, you're so cheap, you're always thinking about yourself. And then she realized this doesn't get her anywhere. So she changes her approach. One night after dinner, Nurit turns to Zev and says, I would like to give some money to our children to help them for the holiday expense. Whenever I bring up this topic, you're usually against it. I feel disappointed. I would like to respect you as a partner. I would like to see if you have anything against giving money to our children. But if you are completely against it, it's very difficult for me. I would like to feel that my husband at least understands, if not agrees with that position. Zev did not agree at first. So what did Nurit do? She proposed giving, instead of money, she proposed giving a gift instead. He sat on the table with her and listened to whatever she had to say, because she was no longer coming from a place of attacking him. It was the first of many discussions that they had on this subject, where he was willing to compromise with her, and he was willing to give them a smaller gift instead of a larger gift that Nurit had in mind. So do not attack. Whenever Nurit used to come to her husband in the past, and she would call him names, what happened? He felt attacked. He didn't even want to continue the conversation, and the conversation was shut down. The minute Nurit came to him and she used more I feel disappointed. I feel that maybe you don't listen to me. Instead of saying, you're self-centered, you're such a cheap person, you're so unrealistic, whatever name calling she did used to shut the conversation down. The minute she changes the you to an I, there's no more attack. Her husband is now willing to listen to her. Now, did she get exactly what she hoped for? No. He still didn't agree to give a large amount of money to the children, but they compromised. He agreed to go for a smaller gift instead, and she didn't go further because it's better than what he usually did, which is nothing. So sometimes we have to understand, when we're coming to our husband or wife with a proposal, it doesn't mean that they're going to agree with 100% of what we have to tell them. Sometimes they're going to agree to go a little bit less, and that is also okay. We have to understand we're communicating, we're talking. Now, talking does not mean that they have to listen and agree with everything. Listening, yes, they're listening. Do they have to agree with everything? Not necessarily. And we need to be respectful of their decisions as well. And finally, we're going to go into rule number, which is called Do Not Mind Read. In this book, it's rule number 5. And I think that's going to be the 3 rules that we're going to discuss for tonight. And again, for those of you who are joining us right now, okay, just in case somebody's joining us, we're learning this book, which is called 10 Minutes a Day for a Better Marriage. And we're on a chapter which discusses how to be an effective speaker to your husband or your wife. Rule number 1 that we discussed for tonight is make sure that your husband or wife is willing to listen to you. Don't assume that when you want to talk, they want to listen, not necessarily. So be prepared that if you want to be heard, the listener has to want to listen to you. Rule number 2, don't attack. How do we prevent ourselves from attacking? Try to avoid using words like you are like this, and you are like that, and you never listen to me, and you never understand me. Stay away from the word you and change it to I. Because when you say I, you're less likely coming against and attacking your spouse. I don't feel like I'm being heard. I feel a little bit tired today. I feel like I need to talk to you about something. Start your sentence with I. And finally, we're going to read rule number 3, which is going to be do not mind read. I think a lot of us can say we're guilty in this. We feel that we know what the other person is thinking, and we accidentally start to be like a psychic. We start to read their minds, and when we read our husband or our wife's mind, automatically we are already making the assumption that we knew exactly what was going on, and we're building a story in our head which never even existed. We're creating this false story, and we're making it look like that's the 100% truth and nothing but the truth. Comes the book and teaches us that's wrong. You want your husband or wife to listen to you? You want to be a good speaker? Don't read their mind. Everyone likes to play amateur psychologist and figure out what the other person is thinking. It is a challenging pastime to attempt to discern what other people's true motives are. If we assume, however, that our estimate of our spouse's motives are completely accurate, we run the risk of inflaming tempers at home quite easily. So if we assume we know exactly why it happened the way it happened, we know exactly why he didn't pick up the phone on us, we know exactly why he came home late, we're going to get into the trouble of getting into an argument. And then tempers are going to rise, and there's going to be shouting matches. Stay away from that. Here is a situation of a couple that made this mistake. Shani asked Beryl to bring home yeast from the store near the subway on his way home. So Shani wants to bake, and she tells her husband Beryl, on your way home, stop by the store by the train station and buy me yeast. Shani rarely shopped at that store, but knew that their yeast was always fresh. Now, why did she specifically want Beryl to go to that store? Because she knew that they carry very fresh products. So she specifically wanted him to get it from that store. Beryl used to pass home every day walking through that store. So Shani knew that she's not asking Beryl to go out of his way. And Beryl agreed, okay? They make a decision. Shani says, Beryl, on the way home, stop by the store and get me yeast. Beryl says, fine. The next day, what happens? Beryl comes home empty-handed. Oh my goodness, how many times does this really happen in real life? He opens the door, he walks into the house, and what does Shani tell Beryl? Did you bring home the yeast? And what does Beryl tell her? No, I'm sorry, Shani. I forgot. I did not get it. Actually, he didn't say I forgot. He said, no, Shani, I did not get it. Now, there could have been many reasons why Beryl failed to fulfill his promise, right? He didn't say why. He didn't say I forgot. He said, no, I'm sorry. I did not get it. Now, there could be many reasons why. Why didn't you get it? Maybe he could have gone to the store and they were out of yeast. There was no yeast in the store. Maybe he was distracted by people around the subway and he wasn't able to go, the distraction. Or simply, he forgot. So what does Shani say to Beryl? He said, no, I'm sorry, I didn't get it. Shani says, I bet you forgot, didn't you? Shani starts interrogating him. And Beryl responds, well, yes, I forgot. Now, there could have been many reasons why Beryl forgot to pick up the yeast. Maybe he had a really bad headache on his way home from work. Maybe he was worried about the pressure that took place in his office that day. Or maybe there were so many things going on that getting the yeast was all the way on the least important in Beryl's mind. Now, that doesn't mean that it's okay, but there could have been a lot of reasons why he forgot. Is he feeling well? Did something happen at work and he felt very pressured? Maybe he has so many things that he wants to make sure he doesn't forget, and he's reminding himself of the things that are super important that by accident getting yeast goes all the way on the bottom of the list. Shani assumed that she was right. He for sure forgot. And what did she do? She broke this rule. Don't mind read. So what does she tell Beryl? Because now she's reading his mind. You forgot. And he says, yes, I forgot. Maybe he's telling her I forgot just to shut her up. So she says to him, you never remember anything I ask you to do. Shaking her head in disgust, she continues, I see. I can never rely on you for anything. You don't even make an effort to remember something as small as getting me yeast. Now, Beryl, he already had a low self-esteem to begin with. That day was not a good day for him, and he couldn't be knocked down anymore. After being berated at the office by his perfectionist father, Beryl worked with his father, and his father already gave it to him at the office. Beryl is now coming home to a tongue lashing from Shani. So Beryl, poor Beryl in this case, he says, you know what? I've had enough. My father all day at work was putting me down, putting me down, putting me down. Now I'm coming home and my wife is doing it. I can't take it. What actually happened? What was the real story? Because Shani already created a story. What actually happened was that Beryl remembered about the yeast. And he was actually planning to go to the store and pick it up. But when he left the train station, he was so lost in the thought about all the stressful events that went on in the office that day that he momentarily, for a split second, forgot the yeast when he came out of the train station. He accepted full responsibility for his mistake. So when he came home and he said, oh my God, I totally forgot. I remembered it, but the second I come out of the train, I passed the store, and on that quick second, I forgot. He remembered at that moment, and he didn't say it's okay. He knew he was at fault. He accepted full responsibility, and he told his wife, I'll go back to the store after we eat dinner, and I'll pick it up for you. But now his wife is mad. She already created a story, and what does she say? That won't help me. I'm not planning to bake after dinner. I wanted to bake when you came home before dinner. So Beryl might have offered to go back to the store now, but Shani judged him unfavorably. He wanted to explain to her exactly what happened, but he said there's no point to even try. He knew from past experiences that Shani is just going to say, you're just trying to cover up for your mistake. So he said, why bother trying to explain myself to her? She's not going to believe me anyway. So instead, I'll just keep quiet and say you're right, because I have no patience to argue. Instead, Beryl sat quietly at home. He felt wrongly accused, unfairly criticized, and hopeless to change the way that his wife looked at him. He desperately wanted Shani's approval, but felt hopeless about ever earning it. He simply felt like giving up. Whenever Shani saw Beryl this way, she attributed it to Beryl's unwillingness to admit that she was right and he was wrong. And the more smug she became about her mind-reading capabilities, the more dejected and disheartened Beryl felt. So here's poor Beryl sitting at the dinner table. He's all upset. He really feels like, she really misjudged me. She really doesn't give me the opportunity to express myself. Here he is thinking, maybe I wish she's going to stop. I wish she's going to stop assuming things from me. And when Shani sees that Beryl is all upset, instead of saying to herself, why is my husband so upset? Maybe I overreacted. She thinks to herself, you see, look at him. He doesn't understand how to just admit that he was wrong. He has this problem. He never takes the blame. So instead of making the situation right, she continues mind reading. How could Shani have handled this episode more constructively? What could she have done to prevent this whole episode? She could have asked Beryl, why did you forget to bring home the yeast? Instead of assumed the reason. While she still is right, she wouldn't still have her yeast. She could have at least prevented from making a situation worse than it already is. So yes, at the end of the day, she wouldn't have her yeast. She wouldn't be able to bake the way she wanted to bake. True, the situation already happened, but all that extra yelling, screaming, assuming, putting down, what by accident happened? The yeast was gone. It was never there to begin with. That's it. That's a lost case. You can't bring back the past. But don't make the present situation even worse. So many times our communication is destructive to our relationships. Of course it's frustrating. Of course we want to be heard. Of course we want to be validated. My husband is funny. But many times we're not giving the person a chance to talk and explain that themselves. So let's review again the 3 things that we learned for the night. And again, there were 10 different communication rules, but we're going to go with 3 tonight because I don't want it to be too overwhelming. And again, if you're really enjoying this type of a lesson plan, because I really did enjoy it, then we can definitely do this more. So rule number 1, again, make sure your spouse is listening. Rule number 2 that we learned, do not attack. Avoid using the word, you are like this and you are like that and you never listen to me. And rule number 3 that we learned, don't be a mind reader. Because when you make an assumption of why your husband or your wife did something and you don't give them a chance to talk, by accident, you start to create a whole story which is not even true, which does not even exist, and make the situation worse than it is. It's not hard to think of others. However, many people think of their own feelings first. Right, Martha? Very true. And you see, we all, I could say, are probably almost all of us, or maybe all of us, are guilty of that. I think in every relationship by accident, right? And we don't do it because we're trying to hurt our spouse. We're not doing it because we're trying to make a problem. Problem by accident exists. Sometimes, yes, we ourselves also feel overwhelmed, the children and all the responsibilities, and maybe this was really, really, really important. Maybe this particular baking was something very time sensitive and somebody was waiting for it. There could be 101 reasons of why we were right in being frustrated. But when you make an assumption of why the story happened the way it happened, and it wasn't even a true story, so basically what the book is teaching us is, yes, you're going to be upset. Things did not work out the way you wanted it, the way you planned, the way you anticipated. 100%. Validate that. Validate the fact to say, I'm upset, and you're 100% for being upset. But now, give your spouse the opportunity to explain themselves, to hear the story first. Many times, if we give the benefit of the doubt, we realize, you know what? Wow, I didn't even know that the train was not working on time. I didn't know that they were out of yeast. I didn't know that it was expired. Whatever the situation is, maybe it's not what we thought. And it's going to prevent this back and forth battling and make a small situation which could have been fixed into something bigger. Because like in this particular case, he didn't bring the yeast. Yes, it delayed things. But maybe if you communicated in a way which is still loving and still patient and still calm, you could compromise and say to him, can you please go back and get it? I really need it now. And because we communicated in a very nice manner, our husband or wife is going to be willing to go and get it for us because we're communicating it nicely. But when we by accident start to attack them or, say things which are not really nice and not really respectful, the other person is going to want to defend themselves because it's nature, right? We want to feel like we didn't do anything wrong when we really didn't do anything wrong. And what's going to happen? There's going to be a back and forth. Now, no one is listening to anybody. No one is going to sleep happy. And there's going to be unnecessary frustration. I love this lecture. Kol hakavod, Yocheved. Thank you so much. Thank you, Rosishka. It's so nice to see you joining us. So again, if you have any comments at all, we definitely love to hear from you while we're live for another minute or so. I'm going to just tell you other topics that are in this book. Okay, I'm going to tell you other topics so that we can also, if there's anything else that may be of interest. I honestly like it because this book gives us situation and scenarios. It's easier to read and understand the topic when we have scenarios, like real life examples. If they just tell us don't attack, don't assume, don't mind read, make sure he's listening, and they don't give us like different types of approaches, it's hard to kind of put it together. But because this book gives scenarios, I personally find it very easy to understand, and it's very informative. Martha, rivers do not drink their own water, trees do not eat their own fruit. They exist to serve others' needs, and by doing so, they do not stop existing. The nature fulfills them so they can continue taking care of others. We should do the same, people. That's so beautiful. I love that. Thank you for sharing that with us. That's very, very nice. So, Milana, thank you, Yocheved. Are you going to continue teaching this book every evening? Oh, I would love to do it every evening if I had the time. By the way, Milana, you actually brought up a very good point. If you're not following me on my Instagram page, please go and follow me there. My Instagram account is YOCHGRAM, Yochgram. I am trying to definitely do more videos, short segments, reels, real life situations, right? Like these books are amazing, but I think if we have real life techniques, like, how to clean up when everything looks like it's a disaster, little makeup techniques to try to get us good, looking good and put together, whatever the situation is, I'm trying to really put more on my Instagram page because the format is a little different. I would love for you to follow me on Instagram. Oh, that's okay, Milana. We're still going to have Facebook videos, so no worries. But anybody who has Instagram, please go and follow me on my Instagram. Again, it's Yochgram, YOCHGRAM. And yes, I also have a YouTube page. So let's say you're watching this video, and on Facebook, by the time you find this video, like a year later, it's almost non-existent. So I actually have a YouTube channel where I downloaded almost, not all, but almost all my videos from all the years that I've been on Facebook. A lot of my videos, I should say. I'm going to try to also, Bezrat Hashem, download this video. So when you go to my YouTube page at Yocheved Dechkanov on YouTube, a lot of my videos from all the years are posted there. So any topic that you're looking up that we've talked about, you can actually go and watch it there, which I think is also helpful for myself when I'm searching for a particular topic. But I will definitely, if I see that there is enough interest in learning this book, because I actually, my husband came home today and I was actually reading this book to him, and he found it so interesting, and he's like, why don't you go live and share it? So I said, oh, okay, that sounds like a good idea. So even if you buy this book and you spend 10 minutes a day yourselves, or even over Shabbat, right? Just take a chapter, sit down with your husband or your wife, and this is even helpful for children. Not only, like whatever we spoke about today is not only helpful between a husband and a wife, it's even helpful with our children, right? Like make sure our children are listening to us when we're communicating with them. Make sure we're not attacking them with our words. Make sure we're not reading minds, right? So everything we discussed today with our spouse also applies to our children. So these are effective communication. Hello, Asya. Nice to see you. These are effective communications that is also helpful with children. So I was saying, let's go over some of the chapters here. There is chapter number 1, effective communication. So I actually did this chapter about effective communication once before. If you go through my Facebook account, you're going to see the communication chapter I did. Number 2, the 4 essential marital communication skills, which is expressing negative feelings constructively, listening to negative feelings not defensively, addressing positive feelings and listening to positive feelings. Okay, then we have a chapter here, taking turns. Okay, understanding how to take turns, the benefit of taking turns, the gratification of being heard. Then there's the 24-hour rule. Okay, there are certain things that have to wait 24 hours before we can proceed going forward. And now we're on chapter 5, the chapter that I discussed tonight. That in this book, it's chapter 5, called How to Be an Effective Speaker. So we actually were learning how to be an effective speaker, which is chapter 5 in this book. Number 6, chapter 6 talks about how to be an effective listener, right? So now we're talking about how to be the speaker, but then we also have to know how to be the listener, because certain things that we're being told, we're not prepared to hear it. And if we're not sure how to deal with different things that we're being told, we're also going to start by accident attacking. Chapter number 7, the 10-minute exercise. Okay, so this is interesting. How to give credit to each other, how to balance your accounts. When things spin out of control, taking charge of your anger. I think that's also very important when we feel angry, right? How do we manage our anger? It's a lesson in self-control. Behind closed doors, shielding children from marital conflict, which means how do we protect our children from our arguments? Because when children are listening to us arguing by accident many times, they feel like it's because of them, right? They start to shut down. They start to feel guilty, like, oh my goodness, are my parents arguing because of me? And that can, by accident, affect our children. And then finally, I'm sorry, healing past wounds. So how to apologize, how to say you're sorry. Conflict resolution techniques that really work. So how do you resolve conflicts? How to compromise? How to bring proposals forward. Okay, so those are like a lot of the chapters. There's more, there's different chapters, but most of all, it's a great book. There are other really, really good books also, which we can talk about. but I found this very, very useful. So once again, I really hope that you enjoyed it. And Milana says, it's not the same when you read it to yourself. We need you. Oh, really? That's so interesting to know, because believe it or not, Milana, one of the questions that I asked my husband before coming live, when I said I wanted to do the live, I said, do you really think people are interested in hearing me read the book? Because I take it for granted. I personally like to read the book myself. I am a reader. I love reading. I like to be in a very quiet space and just read a book. But if you're telling me that this is a very interesting, this is how you prefer that somebody reads to you, I have absolutely no problem. I actually like reading books out loud, so that really is very great feedback. Thank you, Milana, for that. This past Shabbat, some of the guys in shul had approached me about a therapy workshop for their wives. Oh, interesting, Zalman. Actually, Zalman just reminded me a very important thing to make an announcement. It's not official yet, but I will go ahead and announce unofficially. We had a workshop which had to be postponed for reasons which were beyond our control. We already made flyers, we distributed it. A lot of people were looking forward to coming to this workshop, and they did, by the way. We actually have phone calls after phone calls. People came. They didn't get the memo that it was canceled. And we're still being asked, what's with the workshop? Are you doing it? So for those of you that are not understanding what I'm talking about, there was a workshop. It was about mental health awareness. There were people on the panel, including me, Avi Ben Mordechai, and Esther Leviev, the three of us that you usually see on the show when we did the show together, and of course other representatives from very, very well-known organizations. This workshop had to be postponed. We already have a date, Bezrat Hashem. I don't want to make the announcement just yet because we're still trying to get a venue, a place where we're going to go ahead with it, okay? So we have the date. We have everything set up. Very soon, we're going to be giving you more information about this workshop, okay? We have actually more people joining us from before, which is even more wonderful, right? Everything happens for a reason. And I think it's going to be very informative, very helpful. Hopefully, it's going to open doors to many more workshops like this going forward. But yes, for anybody who is really wondering what happened to that workshop, it will, Bezrat Hashem, take place soon. As soon as we get more information on it, we are going to make it public, and I'm going to post it as well. So that, I think, is going to be a wrap. Thank you all so much for your participation, for allowing me to share this with you, because when I'm able to go on lives, it's really, really so special because it helps me educate myself. So even though I am sharing my knowledge of what I'm learning with you, the first person I'm talking to is myself. So we're all learning, we're all growing, we're all trying to be the best version of ourselves. And yes, we fail. We sometimes are not happy with what happened. Oh, I wish I didn't yell at my kids. I wish I didn't overreact. I wish I davened. I forgot to daven today. And we're hard on ourselves. You know, this morning, another thing, I know I just said I have to go, but it's so important to share this. I made a post on my stories. I got up and there was a post about my routine, what I'm going to do for the day, right? I said, get dressed, make breakfast, pray, and blah, blah, blah. And you know what? Because, and I'll be very honest and open because we're humans, I don't pray every single day. There are days that I forget. There are days that I'm very, very busy. Not that it's an excuse. It's not an excuse. It's not. But I don't get a chance to pray every single day. And I realized today, when I made that list and I put it on my stories, and one of the things that were on my list was pray, it actually held me accountable. I was like, oh my God, I said I was going to pray, so I have to go pray because it was part of my to-do list. It's almost like when you are with a nutritionist, right? And you want to lose weight. You know what you're not allowed to do. It's not rocket science. Don't eat bread, don't eat sweets, don't eat late, exercise. We all know what to do. But when we're with the nutritionist and she's holding us accountable and we know we have to weigh ourselves tomorrow with that nutritionist, all of a sudden we are on our best behavior. Same thing here. I actually davened, and not only did I daven, I'm just so proud of myself. That's why I'm sharing it. I even said the extra stuff that I wouldn't have said because I was in that spiritual mode. So I encourage all of you, because it helped me, in the morning when you get up, take a journal, take a piece of paper, and write down your to-do list. I'm going to get dressed. I'm going to take 10 minutes and put on makeup. Look good. Get dressed, because when you look good, you feel good. You're more powerful. You're more energetic. I'm going to call my mother, which I haven't spoken to, and make sure she's okay. I'm going to be nicer to ABC. Whatever it is that you want to write on your list, make a list. Write it down. And you're going to see all of a sudden things that you were not doing before, you're going to do it. Why? Because you put it on your list. You're held accountable. It's going to make you better at it. So I hope that tip is going to help you, because if you see me posting more of those things, it's definitely for myself, okay? It helps me. And I hope it helps you as well. Thank you so much, Frida. I really appreciate your feedback and your comment. It means a lot. Thank you for that beautiful comment. All right, everyone, have a great night. Have an easy week ahead. Tomorrow is Monday. Back to work. Let's make great things happen. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.